So last week, your teenager came home extra late, continuing to dismiss any house rules of what time to be home and what time to get ready for bed. And you just about had it because you tried everything and he's just not following the house rules. So you tell your child that, you know what, that's it. You're grounded. You're grounded for the next 6 years. Here we are 6 years later and we're trying to figure out, hey, did that work? Yeah. Is he really being more responsible now? Is he being more accountable now? Or that was sort of like a semi-empty threat that just either happened or didn't happen, and it wasn't really the best way to go. How about your younger daughter who's playing outside and she just seems to go to somebody's house and comes back 4 hours later and you're like, where's she been for 4 hours? And she says, I was playing at so-and-so's house. And you're like, oh, okay. And that's it. And there went 4 hours of your daughter being out of the house, your 10-year-old daughter being out of the house with absolutely no idea what she was doing. Do we let it go and say, hey, she was just playing by her friend? Or do we get more involved? That's today's podcast, parenting. What do we do? How do we do it? What's the healthiest way? Parenting, big word today, lots going on with it, right? We all trying to be parents, we're trying to be healthy parents, but we also know books galore about parenting, courses up to wazoo about parenting, but what works, what doesn't work, what should be the practical, hands-on formula for healthy parenting, successful parenting. That's what I'm here today to talk about. I'm Daniel Ifra, LCSW, here on the SaneStorming Show, where we sanestorm together, not brainstorm, but sanestorm together ways to keep each other sane in a very complex world. Being a parent is tough, no doubt about that. None of our kids didn't come along with any kind of instruction booklet. And we're left kind of trying to figure out and navigating, what do we do? We know that our parents' generation were kind of tough. We know the idea was children are there to be seen, not heard. And we tried to move away from that today. And today we kind of like moved across the spectrum all the way to, you got to be there for your kids. You got to be your kid's friend. So what is considered the most healthy parenting approach? As parents, we are here to assist our children, to cultivate and to nurture our children, and to give them what they need in order to survive and flourish in the big bad world out there. There's going to be a lot of stuff that comes their way. Right? And the only place that they're going to get that kind of resilience and understanding and skills is from watching the modeling of their parents and the ideals that we instill inside of them. That's our job as parents. But that sounds all really nice, but there are so many different approaches to how we're supposed to do that. Do we just kind of like let them go on their own, so to speak, and like, well, they need to make their own choices because, they have the freedom to choose, and I'm just here to make sure they don't do anything really stupid? Or is it, I will make sure that all their choices are sound and they will feel consequences when they're not, because I need to protect them for the big bad world out there? Or are we saying parenting is something more of, just be there for them, just kind of be their friend? And that's what they need. Or is it really all a combination of all of these? When we talk about parenting, what is an ideal parenting approach? Remember, there's no one size fits all, but what is the kind of generalized direction that I should have in mind as a parenting model when I'm trying to raise my kids? That's my job. My job is to raise them and to do whatever I can, whatever is within my power, to make certain that they can make the best out of their own lives. So how do I do that? What's the best way to do that? That's what we're going to talk about today. So I'd like to highlight, there are 4 well-known parenting models that are discussed. And I want to talk to you about them, each individual, so we can kind of put this into categories. And as I'm talking, you may be able to actually categorize and say, hey, those are my parents. So what were your parents like? Or what are they like? Remember, parents are parents for life. So let's break these down. So we have permissive parenting. Permissive parenting basically says that I'm here to just provide you with your physical needs, to protect you from any catastrophe, but do whatever you want. And I'm not going to be involved on a day-to-day basis. I do my thing, really bogged down with work. Life is hard, difficult making ends meet. I got my own issues. So I'm going to keep to myself, keep a distance, know that I have children that I got to make sure, check in on them every now and then. But for the most part, it's a lot of independence. That's what we would say permissive parenting is. Okay? Then you have the polar opposite of that. The polar opposite of that is neglectful parenting, where parents are really not doing at all their job of keeping their kids safe or watching them or protecting them, and they're just wrapped up in themselves, and they happen to have kids. Sad story, but it does happen. Does happen. I mean, listen, we don't get to choose all our life circumstances, and sometimes it's just so much to juggle. So people end up being neglectful, even though they don't mean to be neglectful. So that would be the polar opposite of permissive parenting. Let's move on to authoritative parenting. Authoritative parenting would be parents that serve a role and that role would be an authoritative role. Kids will know that their parents are here to reprimand, to correct, to teach as needed. But it's done with a healthy balance of being fair and just, and a sense of a relationship where kids can communicate with their parents. And then you have the somewhat extreme version of that, which is not really a version of that. It's authoritarian parents. Authoritarian parents are just really, really powerful parents that are overwhelmingly controlling, and they decide what is correct and what is incorrect and what their kids should be doing and what their kids should not be doing, and they make it very clear to their family that this is the way their family runs. So 4 very different parenting styles. You can have some combinations. You can have elements of authoritarian together with being authoritative, but for the most part, these are how they're kind of split up into boxes. So, what is the healthy parenting approach that we should be taking? Now, just from listening to those 4, I think 95% of listeners will say, well, authoritative sounds the best because it's a nice mix of creating healthy boundaries, being there as a parent, being in tune to your kids, teaching them, modeling for them, and realizing that this is your job as a parent. So the answer is correct. Yes, that is right. However, when it comes into practice, this is a lot easier said than done. Because what happens is, all too often, and I'll just give you a very, very basic scenario. Okay, a very basic scenario is our current parenting style has no doubt crossed over much more into the permissive realm. And a lot of that is a result of, because when we grew up, it was post-war, a little later than post-war, but that generation where parents had more of an authoritarian role, and they were very overbearing, and again, kids were to be seen, not heard, and we had a hard time with that. We had a hard time with that harsh tone, with not being understood, not feeling that we were taken into account when it came to our emotional beliefs and our emotional feelings. And as a result of that, we don't want our kids to go through the same thing. So what happened? We kind of crossed over into becoming super permissive. Your kid has to be your best friend and you need to be open and give them a lot of choices. And that has really become, even if you read a lot of the parenting books, they're going to deny this. But a lot of the parenting books today and a lot of the information that's out there is still going further and further into the permissive realm. After all, we are a democracy and everybody's got their freedom to choose and there's free will, and I can't possibly impose my belief system on others. And all that, like it or not, is going to play a role in how a lot of people will determine parenting goes and how parenting should look like, right? So the reality is that we need to make this adjustment. We need to make it clear, and we need to be aware of each person has to be aware of their own tendencies, let's not use the word trauma, it's harsh, but their own experiences, their own past experience, right? If you had a past experience of your parents being very frugal, let's just say, for example, and they only bought something if you were desperate. What's going to happen a lot of times is now that you're a parent, you're going to say, oh, I don't want my kid to go through that. And it's not even necessarily a conscious thing. It's just a subconscious process that I don't want my kid to go through what I went through. And therefore, your kid has full reign to click anything that they want at all from Amazon at any time. Right? So that is a polar opposite, but there's a reason behind that polar opposite. The reason is coming because of a process that you're trying to avoid. But in trying to avoid, just as we have this permissive parenting, what we're doing is we are moving further and further away from what we don't want it to be, and we're not necessarily stopping where we should be stopping. So yes, of course, we all agree that being authoritative is the way to go, but we need to be extra honest with ourselves about that belief and about how much we're implementing that. I want to tell you something, and I would say that this is probably the biggest issue that I deal with when dealing with families and children and parenting, and that is that parents are often afraid to be parents. And I'm actually seeing a shift because earlier on in my career, I would say about 10 years or so, 15 years or so, I was seeing a lot more of the residual of the last generation where parents were being super tough on their kids. And I found that my role as a therapist was really there to kind of get them to be more in tune to their children, to be more in tune to their emotional side, to allow them to have more opinions. And through the years, I've, without a doubt, have seen this shift up until now. Now I think it's really the opposite end. And I'm seeing more and more this concept, for lack of a better term, that parents are just scared to be parents. And I understand where that fear is coming from. No doubt, I get it. Right? There's a lot of kids that there's a sense of rebelliousness in the air. There's a sense of I got to have my autonomy, and anybody that's going to stand in my way of that autonomy is going to get run over. I'm going to prove to the world how I have my own identity, right? I mean, let's face it, our society has a significant impact on our views and our children's views. And therefore, right, we don't know what to do. We get stuck. And when we get stuck, we sort of do nothing. And a lot of times that ends up being more permissive parenting than anything else. So what happens is, here we are, we're trying to figure out what the best way to go with parenting is, but we don't want to re-traumatize our children. We don't want to take away their sense of independence. We don't want them not to be heard. We don't want them to feel that we haven't taken into consideration their emotional needs and their emotional, all the different parts of what they struggle with. So therefore, we will overly compensate and be overly validating. And validation is huge. Don't get me wrong, validation is super important. But what we do is we will over-validate and we will overcompensate and we will be overly permissive. And I think that has played a strong role in a lot of the issues that we see with our families and our youth as we speak. I want to tell you about an interesting study that they did. They followed these 4 parenting models of kids who were in therapy, and they followed them for years and years and years. And all of them had to break down their parenting into either neglectful, permissive, authoritarian, authoritative, and they followed them all the way well into adulthood. And what they found was really something astonishing, absolutely astonishing. And I heard this, I was blown away, because contrary to what you might believe and think, oh yes, it was the authoritarian parent that everybody was, that kids ended up being so resentful towards, and as a result of that had all kinds of problems. When you followed these families, what you found was that the complaints and the looking back on their childhood, what they heard more than anything else out of all the parenting skills is that the permissive parenting and the neglectful parenting are the ones that individuals resented the most. You couldn't hear things about how my parents didn't hear me out and how my parents, I mean, you heard it, but I'm talking about the overwhelming majority. You didn't hear things about how my parents didn't hear me out and how my parents were so controlling. That may have been stuff that you heard, but that wasn't attached to a belief of why they're struggling later in life. You know what you did hear, though? What you did hear was, my parents weren't there for me. They didn't set boundaries. They let me do whatever I wanted. They just weren't involved. Just think about that. If they really cared about me, why would they be so out to lunch? These are the kind of things that, when followed, actually came to the forefront of the study. So it's not something that we should take lightly. It's absolutely not something that we should take lightly. It's parenting is complicated. It's a balancing act. It's a tightrope, and there are going to be times that we're going to get it wrong, and we're going to make the wrong call, and all that is true. However, we have to realize something. Our role of parents, right, is not to just let our kids just be able to kind of like be there biologically. Biological parents is just that, biologically parents. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about parenting. Parents is a definition. Parenting is things that we do as parents in order to facilitate our kids to grow up to be healthy members of society. So here we are, right? We're seeing this shift of this permissive parenting, and people are coming into therapy, and parents don't really know how to handle it, and parents don't know how to deal with it. So what's going to be our guiding light? How are we going to know exactly when and how to get it right? What are the rules? So here's the answer. The answer is there are guiding ideals. There's a map, but it's not scientific. It's going to vary from kid to kid. It's going to vary from situation to situation, and you are going to get it wrong. Let's accept that. If you're willing to accept that, then we can move on and move forward. So here goes. Here's the ways. Here is the ways for parenting. Real parenting is setting boundaries, setting limits with a balance of love, fairness, and communication. You heard that? I'll say it again. Setting boundaries, limits with a balance of love and healthy communication. If you can do that, and you can plug in whatever your situation is into that consistently, I say it again, consistently, you guys are going to be great. Does that mean every single time we're going to get that formula perfectly correct? Absolutely not. And if you think you are, you're making a big mistake. Or maybe you're just a narcissist. I don't know. But the idea is that is the formula. Setting boundaries and limits means at the end of the day, you're in the driver's seat. You are the parent. I don't care how much independence and autonomy your child needs or has. Those are not contradictory to setting boundaries and limits as parents and to being the authoritative figure in their life. If a child grows up without a concept of authority, right? How do you ever expect them to follow the law, to follow the rules in the workplace, to follow society's basic standards of what's acceptable and appropriate and what's not? Remember, when kids are growing up under your wing, you are their microcosm of the entire universe of how it works. The mechanics, what flies, what doesn't fly, and that's where they're getting their foundations for life. So boundaries, limits, authority, it's all huge. Anything less than that is simply just not parenting. But if you have those boundaries and those limits without the balance of healthy, positive, and love and relationship and communication, you're doing a half a job. If you're doing your parenting with setting boundaries and limits without a balance of relationship, communication, and love, then what you end up being is more authoritarian and more of a dictatorship. And we want to stay away from that because that's something that can be very detrimental, especially today's day and age where kids they need to feel that they matter. No question about that. You know, people think I'm old school, and maybe parts of me are old school, right? But I think that, again, if we keep that balance, there's nothing we can't do as parents. It's going to be bumpy, it can be uphill, no question about that. That's what parenting is. Parenting is not meant to be easy. If you thought parenting was meant to be easy, then somebody sold you the Brooklyn Bridge. So let's give a couple examples of how what this would look like on the ground in real time. So let's talk about a real extreme case, right? You have your teenager that comes home at night, walks through the door, 1 a.m. Maybe they'll tell you where they were, maybe they won't, right? And they're really not being taken to task on the timing and who they've been hanging around with. Okay, that's permissive to say the least. But you're also giving those kids, you're giving them a sense that I have no accountability. I have nobody to be beholden to. There's nothing that I have to follow. There's no limit, right? But let's say I have a similar kid who is jumpy and needs his time, and he's an older teenager and he pushes that limit, right? But I give him my phone and I say, listen, if you're going to be out past a certain time, I need to hear from you. I need to get a text once an hour, and I need to know where you are and when you're coming home. And if I don't hear from you, then that we're going to have to make changes to the plan. So did I say not to let the kid go out altogether? Am I telling you what time to have your kid come home? No, that's going to depend on every single individual situation, right? But what I am saying is you're keeping the communication, you're keeping the connection, the relationship, and you're also setting boundaries and limits that you just can't do as you please, when you're part of a bigger family, when you're part of a unit. Being part of a unit means that I need to take them into account. I can't just come and go and not think about the fact that other people are thinking about me, worrying about me. House rules, all those things are things that are going to build your child's character and not in any way take away from your child's character. So that's just one example. I'll give you another one real quick, another quick example too. All right, so now I would like to give you an example of, I guess that my previous example, my first example was an example of something that could have been extremely permissive. And what we did was we sort of geared it into a way that still provides the important boundaries and limits. I want to give you a kind of an example that shows you the opposite, something that really could be very authoritative, but with a little bit of adjustment turns into the model that we're referring to here. So let's talk about somebody that the use of technology and internet usage, and somebody, let's just say for argument's sake, somebody had a system in their house that wasn't exactly well filtered, and there was a lot of inappropriate content that could have been easily accessed. And you come in there and you've noticed, for however you did, but you noticed that your child has accessed inappropriate stuff. Okay. This is probably a podcast all into itself, a show all into itself, because how do you deal with that? How do you pick up the pieces? How do you work further? But I'm just using this as a basic example. Basic example is I can basically say to make an announcement. Alrighty, here we go. You guys abuse the privilege. No computer, no internet access. I'm shutting it all down. And that would be a decision that you would make. There could be fallout from that decision, because what you're doing is you're not allowing for the understanding and the need of communication and education and limits and sense of authority. But what you're doing is you're just taking away the entire privilege from beginning to end. You're shutting it down. No discussions, no ifs, ands, or buts. A more balanced approach would be, first of all, let's see where the breakdown in the communication was. Where was the breakdown in communication? How long was this going on? Why, when you had something that was so confusing for you, where did the breakdown go that they didn't actually share it with you on some level? Even if they didn't come and knock on the door and say, Ma, I saw this and this and this, which, is not really a realistic expectation, but can they talk about it? Can you guys communicate in a healthy way about the process and what did transpire there? What happened there? Now that was done and that was able to be communicated, can we set up limits? Can we set up accountability? Can we put specific limits about computer usage, when to use and when not to use? And can you prove and show me that this is something that you can actually, yes, conform to in a healthy way? Can you balance that in a healthy way? Can we continue to have our computer usage with a lot more transparency and a lot more accountability? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for to be able to help you navigate these situations and use it, but understand that we're not in this world on our own little bubble. We are here because we're part of a bigger society. And if I'm going to use the family computer system, there's going to be a certain amount of transparency that I have to have. And there's going to be rules that I need to follow, right? So you're giving a very strong sense of boundaries and limits, right? And again, I'm not talking specific and I'm not giving specific advice. I'm using this as an example of how this could have turned into an all or nothing, shutting down, authoritarian kind of model. And instead, it became more of a relationship-based a relationship based with an element of trust building, with those boundaries and limits, and being an involved parent in a very authority kind of way, because you can't just do something self-destructive and not have your parents involved, not have to deal with the fallout and the consequences of it all. And that would just be a small other example of how you can sort of be on this road and you can either turn to the right or to the left. And we want to just make sure that you're kind of balancing this as best as possible. And like I said, there's going to be a lot of this stuff there are going to be gray areas. There are going to be times that you're going to be tougher than you need to be. There's going to be times that you're going to be more permissive than you need to be. No one's going to get it right all the time. But as long as you make this model sort of your focus and your mission and your guiding light, and you can process and question, did this fall into did I do this correctly? Was this something that I could have balanced a little bit more? Could I have been more nuanced about it? Right? That's all I'm looking for, because that will mean that this is your primary sense of direction. And if it's your primary sense of direction, if you didn't get it right this time, you'll get it right next time. And even if you didn't get it totally right, you didn't totally mess it up either. You understand what I'm saying? So this is why we're looking at this parenting thing as a responsibility, as a huge responsibility. And it doesn't come easy. It comes with a lot of work, self-discipline, a lot of conscious choices, and a sense of what each individual child needs. Some children do need a stronger hand than others. No question about that. I'm not going to deny that. So all these things are little variables that come into making a very much greater, bigger picture of what parenting should look like. Finally, I have something that I think would be worthwhile for us all to think about. And once we're talking about these different parenting models and parenting styles, I'm sure we can all identify, either from our upbringing or as current parents right now, times where something happened where we were being very permissive, we were subjected to very permissive parents, right? And how could that have been steered in a different direction to be a little bit more interactive? And vice versa. How about if I just shut something down altogether? And I really question if that was really the way to go. And instead, had I been a little bit more of that mix of understanding and that mix of setting the boundaries and setting the limits and then following up on that, how that could have potentially gone differently. So I'm sure we all have these kind of situations, right? I'd be very curious to hear if there's something in your child's life that you have been very, very strongly opposed to them doing, which is fine. You have every right to do that. But I wonder if you were to re-ask yourself that maybe it's something that instead of just shutting it down all completely, but if I had this other aspect, this relational aspect with them, maybe there's something that actually can be grown. Because it could be a growing experience where it's done with boundaries and is done appropriately with the trust factor and that sense of mutual belief in each other. Or let's say something that I've been super permissive about. You know, my son goes into his room for hours and I have no idea what he's doing. Get involved, inquire, go in there, talk to your kid. Not, what are you doing? Because that won't work, by the way. But you go in there and you sit with your kid and say, hey, what's up? What's going on? Do that more. Learn more about what's going on in her life. Has she been withdrawn? Notice if they've been withdrawn, right? So adding that relationship and that interactive piece and injecting that into this mix of this parenting, whether it's a matter of that you took a step back a little bit too far or you're hovering a little bit too much, making that adjustment. If you can think of an example, and I'm sure there are because we all have them, right? Of things that we could have or we can still adjust. I would love to hear back from that. I would love to hear about those. So if you're watching me on YouTube, of one specific example how something in your life would be different if there was this more balanced parenting style. One specific scenario. If you're watching me on a podcast, your favorite podcast platform, leave a review, mention it in the review. One specific situation that you feel that this makes a difference, that this parenting model could have made a difference, will make a difference. I'd love to hear from you.